thank you to the Portuguese American Club for your hospitality. Thank you to Paul Jakes, Tara Major, for your efforts to help me organize this thing. And most of all, thank you to Frank Callahan, who comes from his office and his home are both on the other side of the city. So he's driven away to be here. We talked about this right after the election. We met outside in the State House. Right now it seems like it's shock and awe. And what are we going to do about it? We need to become more active, get together, work together, not just complain, but think about what we're going to do. I think Frank, I've heard him speak before. He's a very good speaker. Hopefully he'll get you thinking, and there'll be a little time at the end for questions and answers and conversation as to what the next step should be. I've got a couple ideas what we can do next, but I want to see how this goes before I talk about that. We need to be organized. We need to work together. And above all, I want to thank all of you, because I'm looking around. You're coming from a bunch of different places, different organizations, different geography, different lifestyles. It's really good that you all came. This is what it takes. So thank you so much. And this is Frank Callahan. Frank Callahan is president of the Mass Building Trades, and I think you're going to enjoy him. He's a good speaker, and thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Representative. As Representative Hawkins or Jim just said, we were outside the chamber at the State House late last year, end of the session, and we were talking about what we're going to do. It was after the election. We're all seeing the impacts of the short term. We're 2 weeks in today, but we're talking about post-pandemic, the state of politics in general, and people's engagement in public life, or lack thereof. And in the course of the conversation, I was telling Jim, I taught a class. We have an organization called the Labor Guild with the Archdiocese of Boston. We teach union members parliamentary procedure, how to run a meeting, how to be a union officer. It's real grassroots training for how to get involved in your local union. And we put on a presentation specifically for the building trades. As Jim said, I'm the president of the State Building Trades. We represent 75,000 men and women who work in the construction industry in every trade all across the state. And a number of our members, live in New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and so forth, but predominantly work in Massachusetts. And we're a little bit different. When I say different, we're all union members. We're all part of the larger AFL-CIO. We're fortunate to have Chrissy Lynch, who's our statewide president, and Kevin Brousseau, her number two. He's our secretary-treasurer. We're very, very actively engaged in politics, grassroots, in the work sites, all the things that are going on, whether it's in mental health, healthcare, law enforcement, the fire service. God bless our men and women out in California right now and all across the country. We're pretty busy, put it that way. So we put together a class, and there was this conversation about teaching our members how to get involved. In the construction industry, every day we go to work, our members are putting themselves one day closer to being out of work once that project is done. So it's not that common, like, the firefighters go to the same firehouse every day, or the teachers go to the same school, and you get the point. So we call it chasing work. If there's a school project coming up in that city or town, we want to make sure that a union contractor is doing that. So the trained men and women of the building trades, all our local unions are working, and they get the opportunity to earn a decent living on that project, because there's some non-union competition out there, and sometimes they bring in people from out of state. They're not paying the proper wages. There's a lot of games that go on. But the purpose was how to work city and town halls, how to get involved in elections, how to work the State House. And we've done a number of bond bills on courthouse construction, public school construction, the Boston Convention Center. I could go on and on. But we make sure that those projects have labor standards in them, prevailing wage, apprenticeship training, project labor agreement, which we just passed, and I'll talk a little bit about later on, to fix a problem we had with our existing statutes going back 25 years to a bad court case that we had. So it's about getting involved. I know a lot of you people here today are active in the local Democratic committees and the state committees. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard the phrase, born Democrat, baptized Catholic. Did you ever hear that? Well, you're looking at them. My mother and father, I wouldn't be here, literally wouldn't be here, if my mother and father weren't involved in politics. My mother was 23 years old. I was talking to her in the parking lot out here, and I said, I'm using you in my presentation tonight. She was running a campaign. Her cousin was running for state representative at the time. She managed the campaign, and he happened to live about 2 blocks away from my father. That's how they met. They worked on their campaign, and they got married a couple of years later, and here I am. But it didn't stop there. You know, my father's family was very, very active in local politics. My mother's family was involved in state, county, and municipal politics. From the time I was 7 years old, my uncle was a county commissioner, and he was running for sheriff, which was a bigger deal back in those days because of the jobs that came with it. It was, you know, plain and simple patronage. And I was 7 years old, and they would give us a sheet of paper, and my cousin, his son was 2 years, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. They would drop us off, fit as many kids as you could in a big old 1970 Impala station wagon, so there's a lot of kids in there. And they would dump us off with a piece of paper, a handful of flyers, in a strange town we had never been in, and they said, we'll be back in an hour to pick you up. You get arrested today if you ever did that. But we thought we had it made. We'd be running our little legs off, getting chased by dogs, getting yelled at by people, ringing doorbells. And then we got to eat all the pizza we could eat and drink well, they didn't have 2-liter bottles of Coke, but we drank a lot of Coca-Cola back in those days. And we had a blast. But that's how I grew up, in facilities like this. You know, the Knights of Columbus halls, the Legion halls, the Irish American Club, the Portuguese Club, halls just like this. And that was a great day for us. We had fun. And of course, we were working on the campaigns. In that case, it was my uncle. He lost that race, but that's another story for another day. And but that wasn't the last campaign. We kept getting involved. My father was a town meeting member. My cousin, I don't know if you ever heard of Ned Dever, he was the state representative from Arlington. My mother's uncle was governor in the 1950s, Paul Dever. You may have heard of the Dever School. So you get the point. We were very, very active, and it was just a fact of life. You know, you turned 18, and my father would drive you, not just us, any of my friends would say, happy birthday, and I'll get in the car, we're going to town hall, and you're going to register to vote. And that's just the way it was. And so that's what we did. Now, we kept on working on campaigns. Again, we had fun with it. Met a lot of girls, you know, it was just like my parents met. But when we were in high school and everything else, but it was also about issues. It wasn't just about the patronage. It was about getting things done, building roads, building bridges. Even back then, we were talking about a lot of that stuff. And that's the bottom rung. Now, I like to talk about politics and the rungs on the ladder. You know, the first rung is register and to vote. As I mentioned, my father would drag us down to town hall. He didn't have to drag us, but it dragged a bunch of my friends. We'd get to town hall. Everybody in this room, everybody in America gets one vote. So that's the bottom rung, getting registered to vote and actually voting. And as I said, you got the impression I've been involved in this a long, long time, and that's just part of my culture, part of my upbringing. That's like part of the reason I'm here. And I remember, those of you I live in Arlington. We were working on a campaign. It was in Somerville, in Teal Square in Somerville, and I'm holding a sign on election day because that was a standard thing in our family too. You took a vacation day on election day, or you called in sick. You took the day off, but you worked all day at the polls. You got there at 7, and you were standing there all day long. And my father did the same thing. He knew everybody in town. He was third generation in town, and he was just worth his weight in gold, standing in front of the polls. But there was a guy walking down the street, and this was in the 1980s, and I'm standing there holding a sign, you know, smiling and waving. I'm sure all of you have done this. And this guy comes up very sneeringly, and he says, I don't vote. And of course, I was a little bit younger back then, a little bit more brash, and a little bit more full of myself. And I said, the hell with it, he says, I'm not registered to vote. I they're all corrupt, blah, 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 so nothing to lose, right? So I laid into him pretty good, and I says, oh, you're smarter than everybody else, and I won't give you all, I won't use some of the language that I used, but you get the point. Prior to that, another lesson that I learned was I was probably a junior in high school, and because of our activity and campaigns, we knew all the selectmen in town, all the town meeting members, county commissioners, state reps, the whole 9 yards. And we were very, very familiar with them. And one of the guys was a good friend of my father's, was a selectman, and I was helping him out doing something. I happened to be in his office one day, and he gets a phone call from a constituent. And he put me on speaker, which was a big deal back in those days. You know, nobody had those types of phones. But he puts me on speaker, and she laid into him pretty good. She was something like a pothole in front of her house. So she had some standard constituent issue. And I voted for you, and I'm a taxpayer, blah, blah, blah. And she laid into him pretty good. And he was very nice to her, wrote her name down, wrote her phone number and her address, and he hung up the phone. And this is all before computers. So he opens up the drawer, pulls out the voter list. It was an old spreadsheet, thunked down, and he looks up, Mrs. Jones or whatever her name was. And he says, oh, Mrs. Jones, who worked on the campaign and voted for me in the last election? She's not even registered to vote. He took the note that he had written out and he crumpled it and threw it right in the barrel. Now, I'm not advocating that. I don't think that's right. But that's just a fact of life. But both that guy I was talking to in Teal Square and that constituent who called her a member of the Board of Selectmen, they didn't count. They weren't voted, so he could be dismissed. And I try to emphasize that with my own children and a lot of younger people and union members. That's the bottom rung. If you don't vote, that's it. You're out of the game, and you've taken yourself out of the game. But that, again, is the bottom rung. The next rung, you got to be an informed voter. Most of the people here, I assume, know who their elected officials are, but you would be amazed, and maybe not, at how many people out there don't have a clue who their state representative is, who their state senator is. I used to have people all the time. I used to work for the building trades in Western Massachusetts, and I would ask people who their state senator is. Well, Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy's my state senator. And I'd be nice about it. And I said, well, no, he's a United States senator, but who's your state senator? Well, Ted Kennedy. They would just keep blasting away. And you'd have to explain it to them. Because we were trying to get an issue passed up at the State House. I couldn't tell you which one of the many issues. But knowing who those people are, and not just your U.S. Senator, your member of Congress, your state representative, your state senator, of course, the governor, everybody knows who the governor is if they read a newspaper, but they don't know who their local elected officials are. And that's where we'll get into that in a bit, that's where the rubber really meets the road. But also where they stand, getting to know who they are. And you don't have to be as engaged as many of you are, or as I was. I was fortunate enough to be growing up with the background I had. Call them. Look at their websites. It's so much easier today with a cell phone. I mean, you could sit there, God knows, you get access to everything. My kids, I wish they didn't have them in front of them as often as they do, but they have access to that, and they will know. They won't say Ted Kennedy, but they'll look it up to their credit. So you know where they stand on the issues. And certainly before you call up, I might call on prevailing wage, project labor agreements, workers' comp, unemployment insurance was in the newspaper today, or teachers' issues, or firefighter issues, or the mental health issues we've got going with Pappas and Pocasset right now. We need to know where they stand, and then you call them, and thank them if they're with you, and then try to convince them if they're not. The other piece is, we're unfortunately, I hear the phrase all too often, we're in a post-truth world, and we're seeing a lot of it in the last 2 weeks, or last 8 years, actually. But the last 2 weeks, we've seen it's really been on display. You got to find your trusted sources. There are good sources in the media. They all have their bias. I mean, I think MSNBC is almost as bad as Fox on the other side, but that's my own opinion. But you can't trust most of the stuff you see out there. But go straight to the source. Watch local cable television for events like this, or at the town meeting or city council meetings, and see what they're saying right there. I'm fortunate enough to be up at the State House on a fairly regular basis, so I get to go to the hearings. And those votes, which you might not hear about, I get to see, where they stand on many of the issues that I talked about and many others. But just to find out, and call them up. Go straight to the source. Call Representative Hawkins and say, where do you stand on issue X, issue Z? And they'll tell you. And if you don't get to him, call his office and get a staffer, or set up a meeting. But those are some of the things. Again, I was more talking about the elections leading up to that. But be informed before you vote. Now, after the election, I always say to our members in the building trades and the labor unions, that's when the business guys go to work. They contribute money to both sides, so they get in the door a lot of times, or they get access, but they go to work the day after the election. A lot of times, too many people on our side of the aisle, and when I say our side of the aisle, I'm talking about unions, but on the Democratic Party and the average person, they think our guy won, or our woman won, we're all set. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's the start. Well, I guess the election is the start. But getting the work done, winning an election, to me, doesn't mean anything without their follow-through and without the legislative accomplishments, the legislative achievements, whether it's as concrete, literally, as building a bridge or a firehouse, or a pay raise for public employees, teachers, schools, and all the services that we rely on. I could go on, but I think you get my point. I took this from a group called ARC, and it's a lot of the stuff. I apologize for the print, but that's what I was able to get off their website. It talks about the ways to reach out to your elected officials, writing letters, making phone calls. I think it's pretty comprehensive, because I always remember there was the former Senate President Stan Rosenberg. As I mentioned, I used to work in Western Mass. He was my state senator. I worked on one of his first campaigns, and he was brilliant when it came to this stuff. But one of the things he always talked to us about was contacting your elected officials. And he said, 5 letters, and it goes in a file. And I can't remember the exact numbers. 10 letters, it comes up in a meeting. 20 letters, the state rep or the state senator is asking their staff, how come I'm not a co-sponsor of that bill? State reps, state senators, and members of Congress, U.S. senators, elected officials, they listen, despite all what we read about in the newspapers. And there's a couple that aren't my favorites, but in generally, state representatives, state senators, elected officials, they wouldn't be there if they didn't give a damn. It's a pretty tough job. It's a lot of phone calls, a lot of late nights. I think they get disparaged far too often and unfairly, but they listen. But they can't listen if you're not talking. Whether that's making a phone call, writing a letter, and I was always told a handwritten letter is the best, because that means you sat down at your kitchen table or your dining room table and took the time to write that out. If all you can get is an email or a form letter in, that's not bad either, but every point of contact makes a difference. And I can certainly tell you from my experience, getting those letters in makes a difference. Can't tell you how many times I've been up at the State House, and I'll go back to when Tom Finneran was the Speaker of the House, and I mentioned unemployment insurance. They were trying to cut our benefits for our members. Again, in the construction industry, I talked about you're working yourself out of work on a regular basis, and fortunately, the work has been pretty decent in the last 5 or 6 years, but our members pretty heavily rely on unemployment insurance because of the ups and downs of the construction industry. But we had our members hounding the hell out of the legislature. Phone calls, emails, letters, visits in the district. Now, I actually didn't like him at the time, but I grew to like him. Tom Finneran was whatever you think of him, he was the best combinations of brains and balls I've ever seen in my life. He was one of the toughest guys going, smart as they come. Guy was brilliant, and we ended up working and getting some pretty decent stuff going. But they were against us on this. They were going to cut the benefits. But because of the fact that we had so many phone calls, so many letters, so many in-district meetings, in-state house meetings, rallies. I mean, I can remember one state representative who was a good friend, and she was a big supporter of us. She says, Frank, she says, you gotta call off the dogs. She says, I'm at the supermarket the other day. 5 guys came up to me. I didn't even make it by the meat counter. And 5 guys are hounding the hell out of me on unemployment. And I said, well, when the vote happens, we'll call off the dogs. We're not calling off the dogs until, pardon the expression, but, and we were sitting in there with all the business guys lined up, all the big business associations, and they wanted it bad, but we had the numbers. We had the phone calls, and the legislators, to their credit, listened. And that's my point. We made sure that they knew that their constituents, the people who live in their district and people who vote, cared about this, and we won against overwhelming odds. The Boston Globe was kicking our teeth in, the Boston Herald's, the whole 9 yards, but we were able to prevail. And that's the way it should work, and that's the way it did work in that case. In those letters, in those emails, it's highlighted in this piece I just handed out. Don't make it personal. Be respectful. And remember, they listen to you. There's no need to, we see too much vitriol today, whether it's on the radio, online, on TV, the talking heads to drive you crazy on the weekends. It doesn't have to be like that. And, particularly with the staff, I've seen people be pretty rude to staff up at the State House. And I've gotten pretty angry myself sometimes in disbelief, but it never works. If that should be enough in its own right. But again, be respectful. These people are working hard. You're not the only person coming in to meet with them. Your issue isn't the only issue that's before them. I'm looking at, you're dealing with every issue under the sun, and but it's remembered, and nobody likes that person who lays into a staff person in particular, but a rep or a senator. It's not going to get you anywhere, and it shouldn't. So just leave it at that. So I want to talk about, that's about you getting your message out as an individual. But there's another thing, expand your influence, be a multiplier. It's not just you. Because how many people there are? 6.5 million people in Massachusetts. I don't know how many voters we have. But you're one person. You have the one vote. Everybody's got that one vote. But you can magnify your influence. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be in the position I'm in with the building trades. We represent 75,000 people. So we've got a pretty loud voice, but not as loud as the Boston Globe sometimes, not as loud as some other interest groups, but we have some influence when we direct it the proper way. But you can too. Get other people involved. I mean, I always think about, I mentioned joining a union, but join an advisory group. Be at the local Democratic Committee. Be in an organization for, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of local issues to try to build a sports field or a fire station or a new school. All those issues that we all have, or preservation or housing issues, things like that. You got to get together and be a collective voice. Constituent meetings. Bring a bunch of people. Go to a constituent meeting, and I'm assuming you got office hours in the district. You could go to the State House. You could call your own meeting. Say, hey, Representative, we want to meet with you here. We want to meet with you at a coffee shop, wherever, or someone's house, and bring a bunch of people. I see some people nodding their heads. I'm assuming you've done some of this as well. This is another one that we did up at the State House. We had about 500 people up in front of the State House this past July on project labor agreements, an issue I mentioned earlier. That took 25 years to fix a bad court decision. 25 years to clean that up. But that was sort of the culmination of, as obviously, many years of work. But even this past legislative session, legislative hearings, phone calls, letters, social media posts, guest op-eds in the Boston Globe and local newspapers, meetings in the districts. There was a tremendous, tremendous amount of work. That's the fun stuff. But not too many people can do that. Not too many organizations can put 500 people, not just for a rally up at the State House, but they all went into the State House afterwards and met with their state representative. And those of which who had to go back to work, we pulled people off job sites all over the city of Boston that day. And the ones that had to go back, they sent an email, they made a phone call, or they followed it up in some other manner, and we were able to get that done. And that was many late nights. I think you guys were up there the same night during the economic development bill. Yeah, you were up there till what, 6 in the morning? Yeah, so a lot of late nights up at the State House. Notice 10 o'clock in the morning, sorry. So they didn't get there at 10 o'clock. They left at 10 o'clock in the morning from the night before. But that's what it takes sometimes. But that's that juice you had, right? Because your members had called. Same with us, that story I told about unemployment insurance. That same night when we did this, in the economic development bill, I was asked 3 or 4 times to pull our amendment. We'll take care of you in conference committee. I said, oh, thanks, but no thanks. And it wasn't just Democrats. We had 3 Republican co-sponsors in the Senate. Made it awful hard. We had, I think, well, there's 40 members of the Senate. We had about 30 co-sponsors. Makes it kind of tough to say you're not going to pass an amendment when 30 people have signed on to your piece of legislation. So we had some leverage. And I don't mean that in the negative way, in the positive way, because we did our homework. There's also, I mentioned op-eds, letters to the editor. Those aren't as big as they used to be, because unfortunately people don't read the papers. I mean, in addition to working on campaigns when I was younger, my first job was as a paper boy. I made a lot of money at it, and I loved it. My dog loved it every morning. I got to go for a walk every day. But, traditional media is really fading, unfortunately. And, but that's another aspect. These things, I keep coming back to them. Social media, getting out there on Facebook, Twitter, or X, I guess. I won't talk about some of the other ones, but you got to be engaged. That's where people get their information, right, wrong, or indifferent. If you're not in there, someone else is going to be. You got to fill that space, and that's one thing I think we rely on traditional media, whether it's the Boston Globe. If we see a positive piece, we run with it. We put it up there on social media. Doing the letters to the editor, the guest op-ed pieces. Set up a blog. The local blogs are great. People read them. They see a couple of people nodding their heads. People are interested in what's going on in their town, even if they don't get out of the house like we traditionally did pre-pandemic. I think that's coming back, and I hope it is, because I miss it. I love events like this, being with people face to face, as opposed to looking at 15 faces on a Zoom screen. But, if that's all you got, that's all you got. But do that type of thing, the social media posts and the tags. That's something we've had a lot of success. A lot of people using Facebook, Instagram, and you tag certain people. I'm just trying to think. We just put something up about offshore wind. The Trump administration's moves to slam offshore wind. We just lost a $350 million project in Brayton Point. They were going to start the actual long-term substantial jobs in the manufacturing of the undersea cable. Now, everybody here probably remembers the Keystone Pipeline. I remember it, and I wasn't too happy about it. When friends on our side of the aisle killed that project, it cost us a couple 100,000 jobs in the building trades. And the Democrats got their teeth kicked in for it. And me personally, I think they deserved it. But this is Donald Trump's Keystone Pipeline. That's costing thousands of union trades jobs on offshore wind. It's costing a $350 million project right here at home where we had a commitment. It was going to be local workers getting good union wages and benefits and training. And then there was going to be 150 good paying manufacturing jobs, high-end manufacturing jobs at Brayton Point. We put that out there, and you got to tag Donald Trump. Of course, you can imagine the blowback we got, and some of the comments weren't that nice. And but you got to put it out there. You got to get all that stuff out there and get that message across. It's a grind. It's not fun sometimes, but you got to do it. Got to get that information. Become a trusted source. You can tag, when we do issues at the State House, we always tag the State House News Service. So all the legislators read the State House News Service. If you tag that, they're all going to see it. It's all about eyeballs, is the phrase they use. Eyeballs on those screens. It used to be on the print. But that's some of the pieces there. Talking about legislation, we've already talked about the elections, what you can do to push your issues, but expectations, we all remember the old, I was trying to grab it today, but I couldn't get the picture of it, the old Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a bill, everybody remember that? The average time to pass a piece of legislation, not just in Massachusetts, is 8 years. 8 years. People think, why doesn't this pass? You know, because everybody thinks their issue, including me, is the most important issue in the world. Or whether it's to build a playground in your neighborhood, or build offshore wind, or health insurance, or workers' compensation. I could go on and on. But it takes 8 years. So that's a long slog. I've been involved in some that we'll say are above average. Casino gaming. We worked on that for 20 years to get casino gaming passed. We were looking at the jobs for the industry, and it's been a lot of revenue for the state. I know some people aren't crazy about casino gaming. Offshore wind. I remember the days of Jim, I can't even remember his name now, when they were talking about Cape Wind, Jim Gordon. That was back in the late 90s. And it took that long, that many years to get that through, and it went up and down and up and down, and we finally got Vineyard Wind, and now it's, Vineyard Wind will continue. South Coast Wind might happen. There's a couple in Long Island Sound. There might be one or two others in New England, but other than that, Donald Trump has scared away the finance guys, so I'm not too optimistic about offshore wind. But it'll be back. It will be back. But that's not what I was here to talk about. It was more about the expectations. The project labor agreements, 25 years. We had a bad case in 1999. I should back up a bit. Project labor agreements ensure that a public construction project or in the private sector, that the people who work on that project have a collective bargaining agreement. It's a standard agreement that covers all the jobs. And in the public sector, non-union companies can bid, they have bid, and they have won on those projects, but it just makes sure that the working conditions for all the workers on that job are equal. Everybody has them. We lost a bad case. Unfortunately, the contractor, the non-union contractor, shares my last name. There's not a relation, but, and the city was Malden, where my office is, but we won the case. We did the project labor agreement, but there was, I don't want to bore you with the details. It was a long, convoluted case, and we had to clarify it, and it passed as part of the economic development bill. Paul and I were joking about, we did, you know, late at night, many late nights up at the State House. But again, that took 25 years, far too long. But I guess, again, I'm above average. My mother thinks so. So those are the expectations we have to have. Not to say, don't try. Not to say, oh, it's too hard, I'm gonna go away. It's hard, and this is the way we're gonna make it happen, and hang in there. And that's what people need to know, because too many people get discouraged. Hey, full disclosure, I've been discouraged many, many times. I've walked out of the State House muttering to myself and swearing, not too happy. But we come back the next year, and if need be, the next year and the next year, and we get it done. That's unfortunately what it takes, but that's the way the system works. And I always say to people, if it was easy, the other side would be passing stuff we don't like just as fast too. So there's a reason for that process to be as hard as it is, because they'd be jamming stuff down our throats left, right, and center. And they do it enough without making it easier for them. So that's something that's really important. So I do want to get back to the elections a little bit, because I mentioned Chrissy Lynch. She's the president of the Massachusetts AFL-CIO. We had our executive board meeting last week, and we've been talking a lot. Presidential elections are over. The congressional elections are over. State rep and state senate and statewide elections are over. This is a municipal year. That's where the action is. Municipal elections, everybody focuses on, everybody goes to vote for president, right? One vote out of, I don't know how many, 100 million. But everybody goes, and they should vote in a presidential year. They should vote for U.S. Senate, Congress, and state rep and state senate. But your municipal elections, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's the most direct impact you can have. And I say this to people all the time, and they don't know who their selectmen are. They don't know who their town meeting members are, their city councilors. God forbid they know who their school committee members are. But they're taking votes on things that affect you, your business, your kids, your streets, your roads, your taxes, all those services at the local level. That's where a lot of the work gets done. And I think people look down on municipal elections incorrectly, and I think it's a shame, personally. And I think that's also where we need to be in this conversation where we started tonight that I had with Rep. Hawkins. That's where we need to build our organizations. I mean, we need to get involved in those elections. They're important enough on their own face, but people have walked away. The pandemic didn't help. People are voting at lower levels than just about any time in my lifetime. Massachusetts in the legislature is the single least competitive legislature in the United States of America. I think it's 7 out of the last 9 cycles. Now, Steve Kerrigan, who's the chair of the party, says it's because everybody's happy with their state representatives, and that's certainly the case here with State Representative Jim Hawkins. But all kidding aside, it's very difficult to unseat an incumbent. Not impossible. And I think we need to be engaged. I'm not saying throw the bumps out. I'm not advocating that. But people need to be engaged. And this is one of the ways we can re-engage people is at the local level. With these elections coming up, whether it's town elections coming up in the spring and city elections coming up in the fall, I mean, everybody's focusing on the Boston mayor's race, right? Nobody knows what the hell's going to happen there. But, I don't think anybody here lives in the city of Boston, right? So, get involved. Number one, get people registered to vote. What was this? Sorry, I didn't have my reading glasses. And if you don't think it's important, I got a question for you. Does everybody here remember Mayor Larry Vaughn from the 1970s? You do, yeah. Anybody? Do you remember Mayor Larry Vaughn? I guarantee you every single person in this room knows who Mayor Larry Vaughn is. Mayor Larry Vaughn was the mayor in Jaws 1. And he kept the beaches open because he didn't want the businesses to get in trouble. The 4th of July was coming up. Remember all those little kids get eaten, and the shark ate Quint, and a bunch of people get eaten? He's still the mayor in Jaws 2. What the hell is wrong with the people in Amity? And it's a laugh line, it's a cheap joke line, but that happens because it's a movie, it's a fictional character, but I bet you nobody ran against him. It's a small town, and he's still the mayor. And I'm not suggesting that every mayor out there and every city council is Larry Vaughn, but I'm sure not everybody in this room agrees with everything that their mayor or their city councilor or their board of selectmen or their school committee members do. And we got to get involved and make sure that you get engaged in those races. And remember, everybody has one vote. But that's not true in some respects. I grew up, I told you, and my family was very active. My father would stand in front of the polls all day long, even in weather like this. He'd stand out there from 7 in the morning. My mother would bring him lunch and then dinner, and they'd probably go across the street to the Knights of Columbus for something else the middle of the afternoon when the polls slowed down. But, he worked up polls all day, and he knew everybody. He magnified his impact. Now, if this is the third time I've pulled this out, and I do this all the time with our members and at campaign events. I was at a family party recently, and there was a vote in town, and I said, everybody get their phone out. And I said, I live in Arlington. I said, get your contacts open and do a search for Arlington and call everybody whose name shows up. Now, I bet everybody in here has in their phone at least 20 people in their hometown, probably more, not just family members, but friends, that you can call. Now, I could run a phone bank with our union members. I could run a phone bank for Representative Hawkins, but probably 2/3 of the people don't know who I am. They probably are not even going to pick up because they don't recognize the phone number. But that person you call, that you have their contact information in your phone, is going to answer the phone, which is a home run right there. Then they're going to listen to you because they know you, and hopefully they trust you. And they might not agree with you, but you have a much higher percentage of getting them to vote for your candidate or your position on an issue than I do, or anybody else that they don't know. So that's one tactic you can utilize. Get involved, I mentioned, with your union. We do get involved. When I call up, it's not the same as the example I just used, but when I call up and say, Frank Callahan, I'm a member of the Painters Union, and I get a member of the Painters Union, and I'll say, I'm Frank Callahan, I'm calling from the Painters Union. Now, some of them do hang up, or they might not answer. But I get a much higher percentage chance of getting them to pick up that phone and listen to me for a couple of minutes. And I say, I hope you'll consider voting for Jim Johnson for state representative, city council, board of selectmen. The other pieces is, join the campaign. Who knows, you might meet your next spouse, like my parents did. Donate money, make phone calls, as I said. Lawn signs, stickers, all the traditional stuff. It does make a difference. If you're in a high visibility, I live on a busy street. People love it when I put a lawn sign on my front lawn because the traffic that goes by every day, and it's a high visibility location. I mean, bumper stickers, doesn't sound like much, but I kind of like them. So I read them all the time. Maybe I'm a bit odd. But and the last piece is run for office yourself. It's, as I said earlier, it's a commitment, it's an undertaking, and I can't believe it with all of my experience, and I'm reluctant to tell you this. I had a friend of mine about 2 years ago said he was running for school committee, and I can't believe I said this, but the first words out of my mouth was, "What the hell are you doing that for?" and then I caught myself. I was ashamed of myself for saying that because of my background, and I believe people should be running for office and getting engaged. But it's a thankless, it's a tough job. And, but we should thank people and we should respect people who step up. I mean, the school committee at the time in my town they're completely dysfunctional. Some of them wouldn't even talk to each other. But that's probably why those words came out of my mouth. But it's changed. And we got some good people to run, and it's become more functional, and that's the way it's supposed to work. But it's not just having an impact, in that case, on school committee, on Board of Selectmen, town meeting, city council. Even if you run and lose, you're having an impact. You're generating that next generation of people. You might win the next time. There might be an opening for an office coming up. You know, I'm still convinced to this day that Scott Brown never wanted to be a United States Senator. I'm still convinced he was lining himself up to run for Attorney General, but that's my opinion. And he got lucky. He caught fire, and he became a United States Senator. I worked my butt off on the other side, and I wasn't successful, but we were not too long later. There's always races that come up, and I think the people really should come in. There's an old story, and I wasn't able to find it today, about Abe Lincoln. It's all his failures. You know, he ran for office, and lost, and then he became president of the United States. You know, he didn't quit. He kept on going. But it also has an impact too. People know. Elected officials know. The opinion leaders know. You know who the active people are in your district. You know who the opinion leaders are. Not just the newspapers, not just the other elected officials, but everybody knows. And speaking of voting blocks, we had, growing up in the 70s, a big Irish Catholic community, it was not common, but it wasn't unusual to have families with 14 to 16 kids in my town. And the Corbett family, they had a big extended family to begin with. They had 16 kids. That was a voting block. And up until about 2 years ago, it was. I want to tell you, their attic looked like an army barracks with all the bunk beds. But all kidding aside, they were a voting block. And you can rest assured that everybody running for office in Arlington made an effort to get the Corbett's. And there was the Regans and the Hayeses and a bunch of other ones with 14, 15 kids. And then on top of it, they were holding signs, dropping off literature and everything else. So I'm not saying you all have to have 14 kids, but if you do, you're a voting block. But there's other ways to get that out there. But when you're running for office, you become an opinion leader in town. You don't have to run for office to become an opinion leader, but that gets the attention of everybody, not just in that municipal election. So again, I hate to keep pointing at you, but you're the only state representative in the House, I believe. And I'm not saying this in a crass way, but if any person in this office is active and they have a campaign and everything else, you're more likely to get the attention of your elected officials in town when you're calling up about something else. And that's noticed. And it makes a difference on issues at the State House, not just in the City Hall, the Town Hall, or the school committee. It makes a difference further on down the road and all the way up to U.S. Congress, United States Senate, and it makes a difference. So jump in. The water's fine. It's again, it's hard. I'm not gonna lie to anybody. It's a big commitment. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of conversations. Some of them not nice, but not fun. But I think it's worth it. You know, I chose union office to run for. You know, we put in a lot of. I see a bunch of my brothers here from different unions. We're out late nights at events like this on Saturdays and on Sundays, and up at the State House late at night, and city and town halls and elections. But it's rewarding. You know, at the end of the day, you get something done. Yeah, not that, but you know, you get something done, and it's pretty damn rewarding to see You know, when I see young people coming into our apprenticeship programs, and you know that we got project labor grants, we were able to take more of those young people into our apprentice programs. And they're gonna earn good wages, they're gonna get great training, they're gonna have health insurance, the best health insurance you can get, they're gonna have a secure retirement, and they're gonna have a slice of the American dream. And that, to me, is what it's all about. I know everybody has a bit of a different bent on it, but I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all about, not just in the labor movement, but in the Democratic Party. And I would argue even some folks on the Republican Party. We'll get some good ones out there, too. So I'll stop there and be happy to take any questions if anybody had any.
I think we have to stand in front of this. Thank you, Frank. You drove a long way to do this, and I knew you'd be good, so thank you. One of the things that I come to realize, I see a lot of lobbyists. The only people working for working families, and this seems to be where things went sideways with us with the national election, is unions, and a couple, maybe Coalition for Social Justice, a couple others. But we see lots of people lobbying for climate change, for education, for a lot of things. But these are the people who vote for working families. People like all of us that go to work in the morning and come home at night, bring our lunch with us, have lunch, and come back at the end of the day. They're the people that do this. Frank is big about getting involved. I think a couple things that you talked about. One is definitely you should be more vocal. I get lots of hate emails from MAGA-type people. I don't get too many emails in support of causes. I get a couple hundred emails a day, and you wouldn't want to read them. They're not all nice, and a lot of them are just computer-generated. I think the best campaign I've experienced was from the correction officers in Bristol County. They wrote to me, and it was personal notes. They talked about, because county jails pay $10,000 a year less than state jails for the same job. And these guys are working in a county job. But they didn't write to me angry. They didn't write to me anything like that. This affects me. I have to pay for my kids. I'm trying to buy a house with my wife, all these things. They said how it affected them, and they were personal notes. Every last one of them was a personal note. It was an email, but it was personal. It wasn't just some form letter that they copied and pasted and sent to me. Those are the contacts that make a difference. And Frank is right. We do listen. We do respond to those. And those are the ones that we can answer, too. The form letters that come, if I answer, it goes to a computer. It doesn't go back to the person who wrote it. So those aren't particularly effective. It adds to the noise, but it doesn't do any help to move the cause. So you can be much more effective in the things that are important to you. But I think the worry is, and the reason for us to be here, is the shock and awe in Washington. And we're talking about local politics. We're talking about city politics and state politics, and we should. I remember, and this kind of stuck with me in 2016 when Trump won the first time, what Obama said is, if you want to respond to this, get involved locally. Everything that Frank's been talking about. That's what we need to do. We need to be strong here. Don't just say, we're in Massachusetts, we're all set. We're not all set. The MAGA movement has gotten a lot of ground in the last couple of years. We're definitely not all set. Don't take us for granted. Don't take me for granted. Don't take the things that I'm working for granted. We all need to speak up and be active. I think one of the things I wanted to have happen, I think we said till 8:30, so we wanted to leave a little time for conversation, for suggestions. We talked about this morning. This one presentation isn't going to fix everything. It isn't going to fix anything. What I'm hoping for is that this starts a conversation. What can we do? I don't want to complain about stuff. We do that anyway. I want to talk about what we're going to do. And either tonight, when Frank is here, because he's got some good ideas, he's been doing this for a long time. He's been doing this for a long time. Or you all have my contact afterwards. If you walk out of here in 2 days from now and you say, this is what we should be doing. We need to start. We need to be organized. We need to be together. We need to talk. We need to be active about this. But please, if you have any, raise your hand, or however, if you have a comment or idea, something you'd like to share. Marcia.
Of course, I always have a
What?
suggestion.
Marcia, do you want to come up here and be on the... Marcia brings new life to the word advocate. Thank you.
So one thing, Senator Spilka is supposed to be going on a listening tour. And as you alluded to the fact that our legislature is one of the most least competitive, but it's also the least transparent in the state. And so I'm trying to find out when she's going on this listening tour. I think if people have any concerns, people should mobilize and try to go to this listening tour so we can really find out what's going on at the State House. There's a lot of backroom deals that happen. There's a lot of things. If you're a fairly new legislature, and I live in Mansfield, so our state rep, the new state rep, is a Republican who's got no pull, probably. So trying to really find out what's going on and really confront Senator Spilka, or confront her in a pleasant way, but find out what's going on. I think that's one thing we can do.
Another one of the activist Barry Sanders.
So I did want to just talk about the municipal elections coming up, and I want to talk to two groups of people. So one is folks who live in your community running for, I'm a city councilor in Taunton, running for a municipal election is a completely doable thing. I tell people all the time, if you got access to $3,000 or $4,000 and you got a half a dozen friends, you can run a very effective campaign, especially if you're in a town and not a city. But you got to get going because your town elections are going to be in like April. And in the city elections, they're in November, but you still have a lot of work to do. So that's my message to folks who might be thinking about running. I absolutely encourage you to give it a lot of thought. My message to folks like Representative Hawkins and Mr. Callahan is we also need for folks to be paying attention to these local candidates. This is how we build our bench. This is how we drive good policy. And too often, I think, the focus is on the state races and the federal races, and there isn't enough attention, there isn't enough mentoring, there isn't enough assistance that's offered for these municipal elections. Republicans have been doing this for 40 years. They know the value of controlling the school committee, controlling the select board, controlling the city council. And we have not, as Democrats, we have not done a tremendously good job at that. This needs to be the year that we change that. We have to be driving a lot of attention to the local, municipal, and town races so that we can, A, drive good policy at the local level. And for unions, that's important. As we heard, your planning board, your city council, your school committee, they're the ones who are making decisions on all of the local projects and whether or not they're going to go to union jobs or they're going to get farmed out to private entities. And then we're building our bench. So who's going to be the next Jim Hawkins? Who's going to be the next Mark Pacheco? Who's going to be the next Karen Spilka? You know, with any luck, they will come from our local electeds, but we need to do a much better job of building them up. So if you're in the position to be helpful, this would be the year to do that. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Barry. And still another activist, Ty Waterman.
Well, I don't know if you recall, but what was it, back in 2018?
We ran against each other.
We ran against each other, yes.
I might have. I was making notes in his car. I might have snuck up behind him and knocked on
You
the door.
did.
I might have.
petered out and just sacked out in my car with the sun pouring in. It was about, 8 degrees out?
Yeah.
You were walking the streets. That was a tough winter ride because our mayor had left office, had left the legislature halfway through a term.
These people don't know the whole story behind that. So
Well-
when I won.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
By a whisper, but
Yes, you did.
the next day, though, you went around, you endorsed me, and you got your people to put my signs on their lawn.
Yeah.
Which tells me you're one of a very few people who are just there for the good of the community, not for your own personal
And-
agenda.
Thank you. And that was a tough race you had.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was against the sitting city councilor for the state legislature.
Yep.
So I am city councilor for anybody who's here from Attleboro. I represent the entire city. I am an at-large councilor. I signed up today to run for my fourth term. And so I'll be running as soon as Easter is over. I start knocking on doors, and you'll see me coming up on my bike. That's how I do it. But we have an issue right in front of us right now, which the Globe has been reporting on to some degree, where we might be able to actually have a certain number of cameras, like Pawtucket and Providence are doing, on a more limited basis. My understanding is that there's a maximum of 9 cameras that can be placed at strategic points. I know our police chief, and I agree with him, says the number one problem in the city is speeding. And I don't know if any of you think it is, but I do. So I purposely drive through the city at 30 miles an hour, so I'm not moving. That's where it is at now, and people line up behind me. If you are interested in that, just one specific issue, if you're interested in slowing down the city, and because we're growing, and we don't have the road systems now to manage being a 48, 49,000 people city. Maybe it worked when we were 35,000, but we're not, and we're growing. What I would suggest is to get active, to ask the mayor if she's going to look into this project. And Attleboro could become one of the first cities in Massachusetts to actually have the cameras. And, or you could ask the other city councilors. There are quite a few of us, there's 11, and see where the commitments lie. That's just one issue. I could think of a lot more, but I want to give you guys a chance to talk too. Okay, thank you.
This is a room full of activists, so anybody who comes up, I could just use the same introduction over this. Chris Raffier.
School committee member.
I don't know why I did it. You're right. It's more of a question than anything. I know union leadership, like you and Paul Jakes, have been very supportive of the Democratic cause and national candidates and the president, but increasingly union members have been voting Republican, voting for Donald Trump. I don't know if that's a problem you've had with the building unions, but have you guys found any successful tactics in interfacing with the younger folks who are straying away from traditional Democratic politics with unions?
A lot of it, thanks for the question. A lot of it is, I think people aren't paying attention. They're reflective of the general population. But a lot of our members, and I was talking to one of them today, I was at my office, and the guy who plows the lot out, he's a retired member, and his brother used to be the head of my local union. And, of course, the argument is that the Democratic Party has strayed, not him. I don't happen to agree with it with this individual, but you talk to a lot of our members, and whether it's true or not, what they see in the media is not a focus on issues that directly impact our members. They're talking about a lot of the social issues, and just for the record, I'm about as liberal a guy as you're ever going to meet. You may not look at with this suit on, but first and foremost to me is the wages, hours, and working conditions of our members. And I will say that there are some in the Democratic Party that have strayed. I'll use an example, and I won't target the Democratic Party. The environment. I talked a little bit about offshore wind. We've had this constant push and pull with the environmental community and the labor community. I mentioned the Keystone Pipeline project and all that. It's taken a long time, but we've finally gotten somewhere. we're actually working together pretty well. I'm fearful that with this current climate, with this current president, that's going to be fractured again. People are going to hunker down and cover their own backsides on both sides, just stick to labor and the environmental community. But we've done an awful lot of work. The state AFL-CIO has an organization called Climate Jobs Massachusetts, which I'm very actively involved in, and Ryan Murphy with the state AFL-CIO, and they've done some fantastic work on geothermal, offshore wind, solar, the whole 9 yards. And it's very easy to fragment that partnership. And that's an example where at the end, I've seen it happen so many times over the last 20 years where, we're working together with the environmental community, and I honestly believe this. There are some organizations in the environmental community, for lack of a better word, using us for our political, when I say us, the labor community, to get a piece of legislation passed, or to get to, and then at the end of the day, well, we tried. We tried to get the labor standards on that, but that was a bridge too far. So sorry, maybe we'll work with you in the next time. And that's a bit of an oversimplification, but that's an example of stuff that's happened like that. I could talk about a number of issues. Project labor agreements is something that I work on a daily basis. And in a project labor agreement, it's the wages, hours, and working conditions is the core for our membership on a given construction project. But baked in there, we have solid, and I mean deliverable, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're all in. We do better than the non-union sector by a country mile on women, people of color, veterans, the Holyoke Soldiers Home. We're killing the numbers out there. Despite the Boston Globe, Charlie Baker, and the non-union contractors kicking our teeth in and dragging us through the mud, saying there's going to be no women, no people of color, no veterans, no minority contractors, no women-owned businesses. It's going to be more expensive. It's going to be a horrible project. That project is just looking at this on Friday, 5 weeks ahead of schedule, under budget. We're beating the numbers on women, people of color, veterans, minority contractors, women-owned contractors, and veteran-owned contractors. It's a model project. And we're committed to that. That's not the only one, but that's the most recent example. And we want to continue that. But there were a number of people try to pile so many things on there. To throw the environment onto a project labor agreement. Not that we don't support their types of causes, but in the legislative process, you got to cobble together your 81 votes in the House and 21 votes in the Senate. And sometimes if you put too much on a piece of legislation, it gets top-heavy. And again, I'm not walking away from our commitments on the environmental community, certainly not. But some people are trying to tack on all kinds of stuff that have nothing to do with a project labor agreement. And I'll just stick to that specific example, and it becomes top-heavy, and it doesn't happen. I'm sorry if I sound like I'm jumping around, but do you understand my point? Sure.
I invited Frank, not as a union member, to talk about that, but because he's somebody who works out for working families, and that's something that we lost as a party. I think it was an article about Joe Kennedy that I was reading last night, talking to the coal miners in Pennsylvania or Western Virginia. And it's not that they don't care about climate change. They care first about jobs. They care first about putting food on the table. And for me, I'll say from the legislature where I represent, we don't do a good job with labor. We don't do a good job with retirement bills. Wage theft still hasn't gone through. It was through the might of Paul Jakes and PFFM that went every day into the State House and stayed through that brutal 23-hour session overnight watching us. That's the only way they got that. We don't do a good job with labor. And some of that's got to come, and that's part of why the tide shifted on us, even in Massachusetts, is we're not doing a good job with labor. But it's got to come from you also. They come across as being interested in themselves when they advocate for labor legislation. But it's not. The wage theft bill subcontractors not getting paid enough, and they can't go back to the company they thought they were working for because they're working for a subcontractor. That's not union people, that's everybody in the state. We need to be looking out for labor, and as a group, whether you're in a union or not, I'm a card-carrying union member, so I obviously believe in it, but that's a tiny piece of it. For all of us, we need to advocate for working families. Yes, we need climate change. Yes, we need technology, we need education, but the people who want to provide for their families got to come first, and that doesn't happen right now. Yes.
My personal opinion is the Democratic Party, their platform, the foundation of it is labor, working people unions. That has been put at the bottom of the pile. So Democratic Party basically has forgotten about labor. We're out there, like Frank said, out there banging on doors, getting people elected, and then when it comes time to get things done for working people, unions, it's not happening. And the Republican Party, which I personally think is not even a name anymore, MAGA, is the new party. If you're a Republican of old school or a Democrat of old school like Frank and I, we're kind of old school now, to use that same phrase again. The Democrats and Republicans of yesteryear are gone. You have the progressives and the MAGA. That's the new world. That's what we have to navigate through and work in. And our members, people on the street, working everyday people, they care about one thing: what's putting food on the table for their families. And that's not happening anymore. Not saying those social issues and priorities are not important, but you saw how the election went. I drove around this country for the last 2 years, every different way, multiple times, 6 times, and I saw this coming. I'm just saying. It's if you didn't see the writing on the wall that was going to happen because working people were forgotten, all of us here, then you're living under a rock. And it's that time that we need to get out of that rock and get out there. And the only way you can do it, you know, the bar is set. There's no more limbo anymore. The bar is on the ground. It's time to fight fire with fire and get out there. People you see, and you've heard it today, you get nasty emails. You get confronted in the grocery store. People talk to you like you're subpar, like Democrat and liberal's a bad word. Well, guess what? It's become that way. And the only way to do that is to take on these bullies and get up and fight. And I don't mean physically. I mean just get up and counteract that. Can't be hiding. The day of flower power and putting the rose in the barrel is over. We need to sit and talk to each other and engage. Because if we don't, this is the new world. Get used to it. That's my opinion. Thank you.
And another advocate's advocate, Derek, thank you.
My name's Derek Adamick. I'm a business rep for the Carpenters Union. And to kind of dovetail on that question, about why did Labor walk away from the Democratic Party? I'm going to put, we're pointing to the Democratic Party, I'm going to point 4 fingers back at me. It's, 3 fingers, whatever. What I mean by that, and I think one of my other brother business reps can also attest to this, we don't do a good job of educating our members on a regular basis. Frank talked about it, Jim talked about it. The Republican Party has had a freaking program for 50 years to get to where they are right now. Every 4 years, every 2 years for, Congress and reps and stuff, but every 4 years, about 4 months before the election, it is this fire hose of information. You gotta vote this way, you gotta vote this way, you gotta vote this way. And they've been listening for the other 3 years and 8 months to this constant drumbeat of, maybe on one way end Alex Jones, but at least Fox News. And what we are not telling them is the core things for us. One of the reasons we vote for Democrats, prevailing rate, protecting apprenticeships. Those are key issues for us. And another thing that didn't come up was in 1988, there was a ballot question in Massachusetts to eliminate prevailing rate. It was defeated, but it was very unsure whether it was going to be defeated in the beginning. And part of the reason was because labor was so fat, dumb, and happy, they didn't realize the threat to them. That was almost 40 years ago, and I think we've come back around to that. We did not pay attention as leaders to the issues that were really important to our members, and we what we did was we did not educate them continually to the important issues. Prevailing rate is still going to be a thing in Massachusetts. And I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, with the PLA law now, that somebody on the right starts to push something up at the State House. I don't know how much traction it'll get, but these are issues. Apprenticeship, the federal apprenticeship standards could change, which could trickle down to the states. So as far as why labor walked away, a lot of it had to do with we did not educate continually, and there was this other constant drumbeat that nature abhors a vacuum. So they're gonna fill it with noise.
My name is Lisa Field. I'm from Taunton, and I'm a union sister. I'm a staff member of the Massachusetts Nurses Association. And to answer our brother's question, I would say we forgot to link bread and butter issues with policy. And I think union members, not only union members, I think working class people are frustrated. It takes 8 years to get a piece of legislation passed. How frustrating is that? When my kids can't afford to, my kids can't afford to buy a housing, they can't even afford their rent. They don't know how they're gonna get bread and butter onto their paper, and onto their table. And I think we've lost connecting it to policy. Nurses, I think M&A and others, we've lost connecting policy to their nursing practice. Healthcare, right? We've been through the Stewart debacle. We're losing a mental health facility, a state-run mental health facility down the Cape, a state-run facility for children who need that facility. And I think that's what the frustrating part. I think our members are frustrated. I think the working class folks, whether they're union or not, are very frustrated because we can't seem to get anything done up at the State House. And these are our friends, right? We have both the House and the Senate up at the State House are Democrats. How frustrating is that? And I think that's the frustration with the Democratic Party. I sit on the state committee. I'm a labor seat on the state committee. I've been to the listening sessions. And I think we again, have to connect it to working class people. How are we going to get bread and butter on the table? We want to all have good jobs with a good pension, right? We want to not have to worry about a retirement. We want to be able to have housing, and we want our kids to have a better life. What more? And I think we've lost that message along the way. That's my 2 cents.
Brian Quinn, Foxborough, Mass. Just to that point, I want to give you one statistic. 14 presidents the last 75 odd years. 7 Democrat, 7 Republican. Everyone here is saying, like, we don't take jobs seriously, we're not focused on jobs. What do you think the Republican record is for those 7 presidents improving the unemployment picture? Bad. Take a guess. 7 of them. What's the record? How many times did they improve it? How many times did it get worse? It got worse every time. 1 in 6. Yeah. Democrats, 6-0-1. Last 7 presidents, 6-0-1. We should be talking about that every day. Every day. That's 75 years. 1 in 6 versus 6-0-1. Republicans, anti-immigration, defund the police, they say, we say, just focus on what we have to defend. That's an unbelievable record. 6-0-1 over 75 years versus 1 in 6. And right now, you have the opportunity. You say that now, you say that the next 3 years, and again, we don't want to vote in our own, or we don't want a recession, we don't want to lose jobs, we don't want unemployment to get worse. But if it does, and you've been saying that for the last 3 years, and Trump makes it worse, that's a great story to tell. To say, you're now 1 in 7, the other side 6-0-1. So I just encourage you to sort of take ownership to what's been good. It's certainly a tough battle. Fox News and OAN and right-wing radio, I listen to them all. It's simple, every day, repeatable. You know, I go to a hockey locker room Tuesday nights, I'm probably the only Democrat in that room out of 15 guys. And all because of simple messaging. But I think we need to do a better job defending sort of what's worked and taking blame for stuff that is not Democrats' fault. I think we are all thoughtful people, all caring, and even hearing some of these things that we said, we gotta take credit for this. You're just assuming Republicans say everything they do is right, and everything else is someone else's fault. And there's a lot of steps that it takes to get jobs involved, to get things to happen. Inflation, that's not just one person, that's different countries, that's different policies, and we can't take the blame ourselves. Stick with that jobs record, 6-0-1, it's impressive. Thank you.
If I could piggyback off that for a second, you know, I didn't come here to bash the Democratic Party, maybe their abilities on messaging, to your point, but I will say, and I have to say, that Joe Biden was like, I felt like I was handed Harry Potter's magic wand. I could not have asked for a better, I just speak for the building trades, I could not have asked for a better president on infrastructure. The Sagamore Bridge, we're gonna see that happen, and that is gonna happen. Offshore wind was going, and President Biden was at Brayton Point for that project that unfortunately is now dead under the Trump administration. The Inflation Reduction Act, which brought us together, like I talked about, with the environmental community, for real, because we can do both. We can create jobs, and we can clean up the environment at the same time, and not be at each other's throat. It's not an either-or proposition. Apprenticeship, project labor agreements, and Richie Neal, our own Richie Neal from Springfield, led the charge on the Butch Lewis Act, bailed out the pensions for over 1 million union members. I talked to guys who are iron workers in Michigan, in Ohio, in Illinois. They were going to get 20 cents on the dollar for their pensions. What do you? It's one thing if you're a 40-year-old person and you can go back to work. If you're in your 70s as an iron worker, which is a brutal, physically demanding job, and you get a letter in the mail that you're going to get 20 or 25 cents on the dollar for your pension, what are you going to do? You can't go back to work. You know, like if you get out of bed in the morning, never mind going to work. And Joe Biden and Richie Neal and the Democrats did that. But I think you were polite about it, but the Democratic messaging is just a horror show. It's an absolute horror show. They should be embarrassed what they talk about, and maybe it's spun, and it is spun certainly on Fox News and some of the, and Alex Jones. God, I can't. I tried to listen to him for 5 minutes and couldn't do it, but I honestly made an effort. But all kidding aside, they let themselves get slammed on the fringe stuff, but we got to do a much better job on that. I couldn't agree with you more on that. So.
Helen?
Yeah, I can't walk up this, sorry. And I don't need to be up here, that's wrong. But I am an environmentalist, and I'm proud of being an environmentalist, and I work in the dirt, and I see climate change, I'm not using global warming anymore, all the time, like in everything I try to grow and do. And so I'm very curious when he said top-heavy and how the environmental movement was making the project top-heavy. There are a lot of work in green energy, and all we got was slammed in the campaigns, and they didn't talk about it enough. And working in, you know, he kept saying, oh, food is too expensive, and he kept saying eggs. And I don't use his name, I just call him the orange idiot. And all they had to say is, there's a huge crisis and millions of birds are killed. Of course the price of eggs, it's not our fault. There was a horrible disease that killed a lot of birds. That was it. So the eggs went up. It's not like the Democrats' fault. But message, y'all, he just said it again, and I keep saying message, message, message. We don't have to use just 3 words. but we certainly can make a better point and simple messages. Eggs went up because we had a horrible disease that killed birds. Well, they say global warming, but climate change is a huge issue. And I'll be working with kids this summer and trying to help them grow things and explain that if we really don't do this now, I don't think they're gonna have much to deal with in 10, 15 years, because the climate is gonna be that much worse. So I think it is primary that we work on green energy and green jobs, and now they're in office, so.
Well, to Derek's point, we need to do this 12 months out of the year, not 6 weeks before the election. We did it, I have to say, there's a lot of people campaigned hard for Harris. Hard, went out and knocked on doors, made phone calls, sent postcards, campaigned hard, but it was all in the last stretch. This needs to be ongoing, and we need to start now. I think we may be running out of our welcome. I saw our host go through, not quite yet, but you all know how to reach me one way or another. I don't know what the next step should be. This has been a very engaging conversation, and I think it took somebody like Frank to make it an engaging conversation. So thank you. But where do we go next? What do we do next? Should we have another one of these? Should we do something different? Should we do something? But I can't just walk away from this. We've got to change it. We've got to take care of ourselves first. I hope I'm not repeating myself, but when Obama spoke after Trump won the first time, and he said, if you're upset about the outcome, you're upset about what happened, take action locally. And I thought about that. After Trump won the first time, I couldn't sleep at night. I woke up having nightmares about what's going to happen. And an opportunity came up to run for office, and I took it, and I'm glad I did. But you don't have to do, I happen to be in a good place to do that, but you can do lesser things that it all adds up. You can run for local office, you can help people running for local office, you can be active without running for office. Make your voice heard. I don't hear many progressive voices in my emails, but you can make your voice heard in a lot of different ways. So we need to start organizing, we need to start talking. I thought this was a great conversation. Thank you to everybody who spoke.
Representative Hawkins and Frank Callahan, President Callahan, this is a fantastic conversation. My name is Tom McKeever. I'm the president of SEIU Local 888. We need to have more of these conversations, and if you were searching, because we're all searching for answers, but if we would love to offer our local up to if Karen Spilk is doing a listening tour, so should Representative Hawkins. So we'll open our doors to you and your colleagues, and let's explore some options.
Well, I have the resources. I put this on. I have the resources to take the next step. So please get in touch with me how you'd like to proceed next. We can keep doing this, and we need to keep doing this. So thank you. Thank you for your support.